to the World Storytelling Cafe, and it is the second Sunday of the second Sunday of the second Sunday. So, and so it's our worldwide story round. Mike Rust is the host, but unfortunately, at the moment, his computer is doing stuff independently. It's AI and so forth, taking over the world, and it wants to update and have a meal or whatever it does before it starts. He will be with us. So the order is Keith Wolverhampton, Keith Lincolnshire, Despina Greece, me.
Listening
Uh,
today. Thank
me,
you.
where am I? Oh, I'm in Gloucestershire, and it's sometimes difficult to remember where I am. Um, and then hopefully Mike will be with us.
I will
So,
be audience today, John.
oh, haven't you got something for us, please? We're very short.
I, I'll try, but
Anything. You're a professional. You're a
Yeah,
professional.
Despina, you got millions of stories.
I am, and I am a mom and a dog owner, so I have to walk the dogs and feed my daughter, but I will try.
Would you
Good.
like to go on now then? So you,
Ooh.
so you can do dog walking and daughter feeding and
Hmm.
generally washing up and uh
I might as well. I might as well. I might
well,
start.
in that case, I'm
with that one.
immediately changing the order. It is going to be Despina Greece, Keith Wolverhampton, and Keith Lincolnshire. Despina, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, Keith. Hello, John. Good to see you all, guys.
Hey,
Well, since I'm caught off guard, I think I might tell you a story we might have heard here before, but it's one of my very favorite short ones. So it goes like this. It was a beautiful morning. The sun was just showing up in the horizon. Sun rays hitting the morning dew on the leaves, and everything was smelling so wonderfully in the forest. So when the sparrow woke up and flapped his wings and looked at the brilliant morning around him, he thought, wow, this is an awesome day to go flying. And he flapped his wings and moved further up the tree, up on a higher branch, and then a little bit higher up, and a little bit higher up. And everything was looking brilliant, sparkly in the morning light. And when he reached the top, up there above him, on one branch was Eagle, and on the other branch was Dove. And he looked at Dove, and he looked at Eagle, and Sparrow said, hey guys, what a wonderful morning. Would you like to do some flying with me today? And the Eagle looked at the Sparrow, and it turned and looked at the Dove. And the Dove looked at the Eagle, and she turned and looked at Sparrow, little Sparrow down there on his little branch, and she said, go flying today? I don't think so. I went flying yesterday. Yesterday I flew across the sky, and my wings and my feathers were sparkly white, and I am sure that everybody who looked up from down on the ground, who looked up in the sky and saw me flying passing by, must have thought that I must be an angel. It was a brilliant morning to go flying. I don't think I'll go flying today. And the Dove looked at the Sparrow, and she turned and looked at the Eagle. And the Eagle said, right, right, flying today. No, little Sparrow, I don't think so. My stomach was full now. I'm not hungry, but tomorrow I will go flying tomorrow. Tomorrow, first thing in the morning when the sun comes out in the sky, I will start flying as fast as an arrow. And when I see with my eagle eyesight prey down there on the ground, I will do a head dive and go directly towards the prey and I will dive. I will dip my claws into it and then I will take it up on the highest mountain where my nest is, and there I will feast upon it. Tomorrow will be a brilliant day to do some flying. I will not go flying today. And with that, Eagle looked at Dove, and he turned down to look at the sparrow. And Dove also turned her head, and they looked down at the little branch where, but a few minutes earlier, the sparrow had been sitting. Hello, Mike. Good to see you.
Hello there. Sorry about that. I turned my computer on and it decided to do an upgrade.
Yes,
We have all been fully informed that it's taking over the world by Dear John.
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you, Despina. Despina, who didn't intend to tell today, but owing to our sparseness, decided to put off walking the dog, walking the daughter, feeding the village, watching for the whole of Greece, and
Teaching everybody in Greece Turkish.
And teaching everyone in Greece Turkish, absolutely. So, but she did find, like, that I'm very glad that, unlike the dove, she didn't turn down the sparrow's invitation. So, the order is Mike and Keith Wolverhampton next, and then Keith Lincolnshire, and then you can then I was going to do something, and then if no one else comes, we'll pass on to you, and I'm going to let you take over at this point because you are governor on Sundays. But if I can, as the deputy, if we can stick to that order, that'd be marvelous.
Right, that's absolutely. So I've got Keith Walls, Keith Links, John, and then me. And then, well, let's get started with Keith Walls and I get myself sorted. And then we can have a chat about stuff. So over to you, Keith. Okay.
Thank you. There is a place called Karnak in Brittany where there are standing stones. Standing stones appear everywhere. These are supposed to predate England's Stonehenge by 1,000 years. And here is one of the stories of them. So Asgar was a brute of a man. He grew up in what is now Denmark. But all these places were tiny city-states in those days. And he was a warrior. He was fine with a sword and a bow and a lance, and he used this to his own ends. And he gathered people around him. And in those days, they pillaged all the settlements around them. And as they pillaged, the group grew, a group of rogues. And they spread south. They spread south into the lowlands. And by the time they were in the lowlands, they were almost 1,000 strong. Men, for they were all men, for there all sorts of reasons. Some were there for the excitement of the travel, for people who travelled little in those days. Some were there for the wealth and pillage as they filled their carts with gold and silver from the various settlements. And some, I have to say, were there for what would be described as the bloodlust, for killing those in front of them, for being more powerful and, let's face it, frightening. And this army swept down through the lowlands and round northern Europe. And the settlements, because it was such a large group, the settlements in their wake emptied. People fled for caves and mountains and hills, anywhere they could find refuge. And the army would sweep through, and they would eat their livestock and eat their crops and feed themselves and fill their carts with anything which was valuable. And this was how it swept through Northern Europe. And then the people would return and rebuild their homes and their towns and even cities. For no one could withstand this force. No one could withstand this force until they arrived in what is now Brittany and the tiny settlement of Karnak. And sure enough, as they approached days before, the people of Karnak fled into the caves. Karnak is on the south coast of Brittany. There are many caves to hide in, and they knew they would be safe there because the army was not interested in them. It was in their property, their livestock, their crops. And by now, they were 3,000 strong, and they were like an army, divided into battalions with leaders who the men followed, and their great leader, Asgar, still at the helm. And before Karnak, they set camp, and the camp spread back for 10 kilometers. Lines and lines. But I say the people Karnak fled. But there was one woman left behind. Her name was Steren. And as we know in all our tales, that in any village or town, on the edge of the town is a small cottage made of wattle and daub and thatch. And it's inhabited by a wise woman. And Stenen did not flee. And she waited. And as dawn broke the next morning, she stood before the front of the horde. And those at the front of the horde, including Asgar, their leader, began to laugh. Here was this old woman in a long robe, standing before them, this army, 3,000 strong. And the word went back through the army, way back, 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers, if you like, of laughter that this woman should stand in front of them about to be swept aside. But she was still and calm. And she raised her arms, her two arms, above her head. And in one hand, she held a hazel branch. And you already know the hazel is the most spiritual of all trees. And as she stood calmly and still, dust swirled around her. And the dust grew and grew and grew until around her was a tower of dust reaching into the sky. And the army looked on aghast. Way back at the back of the army, the soldiers, for they were soldiers, surrounded their leaders for protection. But as the tower of dust collapsed upon them and spread 10 kilometers across the army, every man there, as they stood in their straight ranks, was turned to stone. Now, as the dust settled and the quiet took over, the people of Karnak came out of their caves and from the hills and looked on in amazement and wonder. They also looked across at the cottage inhabited by Stenen, and there was a spiral of smoke coming out of the top of her cottage as she cooked. And they looked down along this 10 kilometers of stone figures. Stone figures over thousands of years have been worn down into small figures. And nobody knows how they got there, apart from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith. That's great. I've heard that before, but only once, and that's great. Now, we've got a change in the batting order, Keith, and I know you're not going to mind because we've been contacted by the Storytelling Centre itself in Marrakesh with Walad, and we have Omar. And Omar wants to come and tell us a story, and I think he's not a very old Omar. So, Omar, if you're there, mate, now's your chance.
And Omar is now our resident storyteller at the cafe.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, he's
So-
just come. Yeah. So I'm waiting for him to come on. He was there a second ago.
He was. Yeah, a few seconds.
Well, I'm going to count to 10, and if he's not here, I'll Keith.
The
you
30
go, and
seconds was the message.
No, here he comes.
There he comes.
Here he comes.
Oh no, that's Waleed.
Oh,
Here's
right.
Omar.
Omar. Right. You need to lift the camera a little bit. That's it. And you're muted. And you're muted, so we can't hear you.
I can see Waleed's hand.
Right. No, it's still muted. Well, Omar, I think you can hear me, so welcome. My name's Mike, and I'm the MC here, and I have been to the Storytelling Cafe. And right, I can hear you now, so everybody's waiting for you to go. Good day and good luck.
Thank you so much. So, my name is Omar, and I am a storyteller. I'm the young storyteller. So, I'm going to tell you one story, a very short story, and I hope you like that story. It's a Moroccan story translated into English. So, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen. So, once upon a time, when the world was still young, there lived two brothers, Hassan and Hussein. Hassan is a rich man, one of the richest men in the world, has a lot of wealthy, is really, really rich, and he's really known in the world, in the city. And Hussein is a playcraft man, he's a very poor man. Hassan, he never cared about anyone. He never cared about his brother, Hussein, who is very poor. So one day, Hussein went to his shop and he got nothing. He get more poorer, and he got any single penny, and he was so broken, so sad. Had a lot of ideas. What am I going to do right now? I don't have any single penny. I don't have food. I don't have. I hope I have family. I have my children. My parents are still alive. I have a lot of responsibilities. So by the end of the day, he tried to spend the night at his shop. So he spent the night in his shop, and he tried to line up the shop because the shop was dark, because he don't have money to pay for the electricity. So he played with some oil. He put some oil. He put a piece of fabric, and he put some oil and some clay, and he played with it, and he created a beautiful magical wand. And he was so happy, so excited. Yes, I created something new, a beautiful and magical wand. And he had a lot of ideas in his mind. So maybe he can sell that magic lamp in the market. But no, back then, if you had something special, you give it to the Sultan as a gift. So he put that all that beautiful lamp in his hand, and he ran to the real court, to the diwan, and he said, "A gift giver, a gift giver! I have a gift for the sultan." And the sultan heard about the story, and let him in. "Yes, Hussein, what do you have for me, poor man?" "Your Majesty, I do have something special for you, Your Majesty. Look, this beautiful lamp. It's a beautiful and magical lamp, and I made it, and I want to give it to you as a gift." The Sultan really loved the story and really loved the lamp. And guess what happened? He gave him a lot of gold and coins to be one of the richest men in the world, to be one of the richest men in that city, to be one of the richest men, more than even his brother, Hussein, Hassan. So when Hassan heard about the story, he got mad at his brother. He got mad at himself. What? My brother got a lot of money from the Sultan. Impossible. And he got envious. And then Hassan had a lot of ideas in his mind. So he started to thinking to create a beautiful.
Oh. I see they're having technical problems over there. I don't know what's happened, Waleed, if you can hear me, but I can't. We've lost you.
It seems you're muted, Omar.
Yeah, you're muted. Oh. Right, you're still muted. I'll send you a message on chat.
Unmute and don't use the video for the moment. Just imagine you're on radio. Okay.
Right. I'm going to count to 10. And then we'll move on. And if he comes back, we'll get him to start from the beginning. I think that's probably the best thing to do. Oh, here we go. Hang on.
Okay, Hassan, when he heard about the story about his brother, he gets rich. My brother Hassan get rich. Impossible. And he got envious of his brother. He got envious and he got mad. So he had an idea, a brilliant idea back then. He'll sell everything to his name to create a beautiful golden crown, and he gave it to the gift to the Sultan. He went to the Sultan, to the real court. He went to the Diwan. "Your Majesty, I have special for you. I bring a beautiful golden crown for you." The Sultan saw the golden crown and he was amazed. "This is a beautiful golden crown. It is very big." And he thanked him very well. Then in return, he did not give anything. He just gave him that. And he said to him, "You know, Hassan, you are a very rich man. You have power, you have authority, you have money. I don't have anything to give you, Hassan. All I have is I have something precious to my heart, a special thing. It's this beautiful lamp, the lamp that Hussein gave it to the Sultan." Hassan went back home, very sad, very broken. He had no money at all because he sold everything to his name to create that golden crown. But in return, he got nothing from the Sultan. Didn't remember the story. Remember that phrase that was written in the front of the shop of Hussein, because Hussein had a phrase in his shop that says, "Life turns around." And it was true. And he said to himself, "Yes, life turns around. Yesterday it was mine, and today it was my brother's." When Hussein heard about the story, he went to his brother Hassan and he said to him, "You know, Hassan, I know that you are broken now. I know that you don't have enough money to feed your family. And I know that you are sad, but I am your brother. Let's start a new story between us. Let's start a new journey." So guess what happened? Hussein gave Hassan half of his fortune because he was very generous and he knew what it means to be poor back then. So those two brothers lived happily ever after till the end of time. And this is the end of my story. I really hope you understand the story, and you really hope you understand the moral of that story. It's a Moroccan story translated into English. And I'm very sorry for the technical problem.
Omar, thank you very much for telling the story, and thank you very much for coming. We have had a little technical problem, but we get technical hitches from time to time, and we certainly did understand the story. And I'd like to give you a gift now. And the gift would be from me personally to you, and it's in the way of a small story that I hope that you will appreciate and be able to tell yourself. It's one from my region here in Shropshire, but it is told in other places. Now, where I come from in England, we go up to a border, the English-Welsh border, where they have a different language and a different culture, and we have our own language and our own culture. But just on the border here, there was a farmer, and he had 3 sons, and he knew he was coming to the end of his time, so he wrote his will. And in the will, he said he had 17 horses. And he said to those 17 horses that he would give his oldest son half of them, he would give his second oldest son a third of them, and the third oldest son, the youngest and the smallest of them all, he would get a sixth of them. And that was about the last thing he did, and he died, and they did the things everybody does do when someone died. And as Baba said to me, he went from being with us or being with them to being an ancestor. So they sat down and they looked at it and thought, well, we got 17 horses. So how can you have a half, a third, and a sixth? Because we'd have to cut one in half, and there'd still be bits over. It just doesn't work. We can't make sense. Our father's done something we don't understand. We'll have to go. And what we do sometimes when we've got a real problem and the men sitting in a pub can't solve it. A pub is where we all drink beer and stuff, Omar. So they went to the wise woman. Now, the reason they're called wise women because they know a bit. And we have another phrase here, it's called old wives' tales. Because these old wives, they sit round and they tell tales, and there's a knowledge in all these tales. And there was an old lady there at the end of the village in a little cottage, and they went along and they sat down and they explained the problem. The one had to have half, one had to have a third, and one had to have a sixth, and they only had 17 horses. So what was they to do? And she just laughed and said, just leave a little coin here so I can have a decent meal tonight. Not a very big coin, just a little coin. For wisdom's always worth something. And take my horse with you. And when you've taken my horse with you, you can add it with yours and then try. And so they did what they said. They left a little coin so she could have a, you know, they took the horse and they put the horse with the 17 and that made 18. And they just looked at each other and laughed. Because half of 18 is 9. A third of 18 is a sixth. And a sixth of 18 is 3. So that's what they did. One had 9, one had 6, and one had 3. Now, if you add them all up, 9 and 6 makes 15. And then you've got, no, sorry, a 2. The last one is a 2, not a 3, it's a 2. So the last one got 2. So he added 17. So they all had their 17 horses, and they took the horse back, and they took it back to the old lady, and they gave it to her. So the trick in the story is that 9 of 18, half of 18 is 9, a third of 18 is 6, and a sixth of 18 is 2. And that makes 18, that makes 17, which is what they had in the first place. And I hope you understood that. And if you don't, when we sit together, well, I'll explain it to you again. Anyway, I hope you're still there, and I think you've gone. Talk about making a bollocks of it. Anyway, I'm going to Keith next.
He probably heard Mike, but they'd have been listening at the cafe.
Well, absolutely, but I got the maths wrong, so I hope you understood what I said. Anyway, we're going to Keith. Will I work out what's the 6th of 18? Go on, Keith.
Okay. Well, Lenny, he just loved parties. And he loved Halloween parties in particular. And so he saved up all his money and he bought a long black cloak. And he had a hat with horns on. And he had some gloves with claws at the end and boots that looked a little bit like hooves. And he went to the Halloween party. And a girl let him in and he was very happy there, looking at all the different things. There's all these different costumes. There were skeletons, there was witches, there was warlocks, there was ogres, there's all kinds of different costumes. Now, there he was with all his costume on, and he had his mask like everybody else. But nobody seemed to be taking any notice of him. He thought, well, he'd be somebody that would really frighten everybody, but people didn't really take a lot of notice. And, well, he enjoyed himself and everything like that and watched everything. And it was getting rather hot. And he was feeling, he got all his... And so he went into the kitchen and there was some red liquid there, like blood. But it was just some kind of juice, but he tried to drink it. But it just couldn't drink it. Somehow his mask was preventing him drinking. And there was some food there as well, but he couldn't eat the food. And he was getting rather worried that he couldn't eat and drink. And one of the girls came in and tried to speak to him, but he couldn't speak. Oh, what should he do? And so he took a kitchen knife out of the drawer and he went into the toilet in order to cut off the mask. He started to strip off the mask. The strips of pink ribbon came off, and it's really, really painful. And he started to shout and scream as he's trying to take this mask off using the kitchen knife. And all the other people there, all the boys and girls there were at the toilet saying, well, what's happening? What's happening? What, like, come on, Lenny, come on out there, come on out. But he was just stayed in there screaming and trying to take this mask off. And one of the girls came and said, what's going on? They said, oh, Lenny's in there trying to take his mask off, trying to cut his mask off. And she said, but he wasn't wearing a mask.
Spooky.
Spooky.
Nice one, Keith.
Right, well done. Right, okay. So I'm going to Mr. John Rowe, the famous storyteller and poet, who I think, looking at the background, could be back in the UK. But there we go.
I'm indeed back in the UK.
Yeah,
it was an interesting journey from Gatwick, but we won't go into that because that's a story in itself. But I'm doing this one. I don't know if I probably did it last November, but this is Remembrance Sunday next Sunday. So as we haven't got a program next Sunday, I'll do this poem. It's called Veterans. They were all veterans. Anyone more than 2 years old when I, a bulged baby, came screaming into the world in my nan's front room. I remember the house in Essex Road and the backyard with its outside toilet and vegetable patch, and my granddad, who found me looking for a policeman to show me across the road when I ran away from home at 3 years old. I was going to see my friend at Tilbury. I'd met him on the district line with my dad. He cracked a joke asking me what I was going to do when I retired. At that moment, we were passing a pile of tyres on the dockside, and the words merged like the trains that met at the bottom of our cul-de-sac on their way to Barking Station. The steam trains ran at the bottom of our yard. We stood in the alley waiting for them. Powered by electricity, the trains running on the other side of the road weren't half as interesting. There were bomb sites too, big gaping holes strewn with rubble and half-standing walls. I thought everywhere had bomb sites, and had no idea of the carnage they represented, only that on Armistice Day I heard the salute from the big guns on the Thames, and we stood in silence for 2 minutes. I did know that in that war there were no civilians. The evidence was everywhere. Gas masks and tin helmets, drawers full of medals from past conflicts, and ration books. I remember the ration books. By my 16th birthday, I learned there were other wars, fought by those who chose or were cajoled into joining, and with each decade came new veterans scarred beyond recognition, inside and out. And maybe because now most of us in the West are civilians, they became other. Whether heroes or villains depended on the year. I've listened to their stories from Vietnam to Iraq. I've listened to them describe close shaves. This week I heard how one man in a doorway watched as his Oppo caught a bullet. It got lodged in his buckle and caused no injury. He still has it. Superstition, I suppose, was the teller's closing line, making sure there was no hint of bravado. Before his father came down to save him, my relative lay in his room in the prosperous South, afraid to ask for a carer in case they billed him again for all of his war pension and more. He led his men away from ambush in the desert, saved them, and ended up a cripple. Folks doing a job, I say, and like all industrial injuries, they deserve to be looked after by those who own the machinery. There are heroes in every walk of life, folks doing a job. My cousin was a fireman, another service. He came out almost unscathed, another man doing his daily work. Cold, I know, but mine was a service family and armaments with my father's trade. Just folks doing their job in extreme circumstances. Maybe if we were all veterans, we would understand that and reserve words like hero or villain for individuals when we know what they actually did. Meanwhile, I listen to stories from those who carry images inside their heads of broken bodies and fallen comrades, and places where it is impossible to tell who the enemy was, from those who could bear it no longer because they could not differentiate between those who gave the orders and those they were ordered to kill. I sat in a room in Dresden as a Lebanese man from a village that had been shelled from the sea thanked my friend who had been in the Air Force at the time for a line in a poem recording the incident. I didn't think anyone noticed, he said. In the Middle East, I talked to a man who had lost a brother in a civil war across the border, who spoke with a fatalism, seeing no end to the conflict. We asked him what he thought would happen. Ask me in a year, he said. After the Falklands, I met men in prison who could not survive outside the ordered life of the army, and men who grew their hair and went on the road not because they were homeless, but because they needed to breathe the sweet air of freedom. One who, after a life of defusing bombs in Northern Ireland and beyond, was defused himself with antidepressants and sedatives to stop him putting wives and neighbours through doors and plate glass windows. A friend who had been conscripted and shipped out to Vietnam, where he joined the medical corps, was sent to the front line to pick up body parts just weeks before he was due to come home. He's still trying to piece them together between clown shows. And a Kurdish violinist from the Baghdad Orchestra who sat and rehearsed in his town square as Iranian aircraft dropped bombs around him, killing all his friends, who wrote songs so children could recognize landmines, who cooked for the Americans who ran the charity until the day he was told to poison them, who ran away to stop himself becoming a killer, who survived it all but broke as he traveled 6 days in a wooden box in a ship's hold before being abandoned in Dover to live the life of an asylum seeker, and one who did not break, but escaped from police custody in Sudan because he noticed those who went in never came out. All folks surviving the extremes, almost, while most of us simply slept.
You wrote that yourself, John?
Yeah.
Oh, flipping heck. Can I tell a strange antidote romantic story?
Right.
Some years back, I'm sorry, Mike, but some years back, I was at my friend's mother's funeral, and so her life was unveiled, and her brother was in the Long Range Desert Group in the 8th Army in the North Africa campaign, and went missing. So his friend was tasked with coming back to tell the family about missing presumed in action. And not only did the friend fall in love with his sister and marry her later on, but also he survived and turned up after 6 months in the desert. So there was a romantic tale from a horrific situation. John, that was just, I'm breathless with that story, that poem.
Well, so was I. It certainly well impressed me, and it is Remembrance Day, but my way of remembering Remembrance Day is different. Well, it has been for the last couple of years, but I am going to tell, I've got two options, but I'm going to tell this one because I have to have, for family reasons, go to Gloucester for many times. And normally nowadays, it used to be weddings and funerals. Nowadays, weddings and christening. And nowadays, it hasn't to be funerals. So there was an uncle of mine, he was called John. And he told me this because he'd had to go to a funeral of part of his old Lancaster bomber squadron. And he was part of his crew. And John was a pilot in the Lancaster bombers. And he passed away a couple of years ago. But when he passed away, he was 97, 98. And we didn't find out pretty much until the end of his life. He had a couple of gongs. But he sat down in a bar one day and said, Mike, I'll tell you this, please tell everybody else around November the 11th. Because he'd had to go to a funeral. And he was standing around, and this was down in the Forest of Dean. He was standing around, and in the end, he turned round to his friend Edward and his Edward's granddaughter, who was about 17, and said, could we lean on your arms, lass, while we go and say goodbye to our friend Tony? And she said yes. So this little 17-year-old kid took these old boys and took them to the edge of the hole in the ground. And John said to Edward, you know, Edward, how old are you? And Edward said, I'm 94. Then Edward said, John, how old are you? And he said, oh, I'm a bit older than you. I was always the oldest one, so I'm 96. Oh, and they both looked for a moment and went, well, how old was Tony then? He said, oh, he was only a kid. He's only 91. And I went, oh. And then Edward said, it's hardly worth us going home, really, is it? And they turned around and they walked back. At his funeral, I met a young girl. Her name's Alice. She was about 20. And she sat down and said, oh, yeah, you're the storyteller. I said, I have told a few in the past. She said, I want to tell you a story of what happened to me. And she told me a story about a funeral of a relative of hers that was called Tony. And two old boys that turned up, told stories and told jokes and drank beer. And just reminded her of her great-grandfather. And a little story about what happened in a funeral in the Forest of Dean.
John, can I ask you that, because when we were at the festival, you said some quite sort of startling stuff about being in contact with the people in Gaza and hearing the bombs falling in the background. Have you thought of adding that to your poem?
No, I wrote it at a particular point. I
Yeah.
wanted it to show it as universal, not so much specific. It was
right. Yeah, fair enough.
Because I didn't want it to be any nation, any. I think it was, I kind of, and it was also about the romanticized view of Bethlehem.
Yeah.
But John, we need a new poem.
Well, maybe. It just, while you were telling it, it made me think of what you were saying. We were in the fire station in the centre when we had the link with Gaza, or in fact Egypt, wasn't it? It was Egypt.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah,
No,
well,
no,
I will. It will come up. It will undoubtedly arrive in a poem.
Right, good. So there's a couple of things I want to say now, and then we've got Norman. You telling a story to finish, Norman? Yeah, right. So there's a couple of things I want to say. Right. So we've got some parish notices that John's going to say, but on the next one will be the 20th of November. Now, on the 20th of November, I want to have two things to happen. I want everybody to bring one person with them, and John and I will get together, and we're going to work out a plan to get a few more people to come on these Sunday night things. And I want you to bring your Christmas story. It's the one that you want everybody else to tell. So I want you to bring a Christmas story that you can give away, because we don't often tell Christmas stories, and everybody's got their own few little stories from Christmas. And I've got a couple of really nice ones, and only I really tell them, and I only tell them once a year because it's Christmas. So I want everybody, if you can come along and tell a story about Christmas that you're wanting to give away to somebody else. And then John and I are going to do some work. And there's another thing that John and I are going to have a talk about with Tony Cranston. John, do you know Tony Cranston from Talking Stories?
No, but I will undoubtedly, because
Yeah,
you're going to make sure about it.
Well, I want to do a workshop about telling stories in a foreign language.
Yeah.
So I want to. We've mentioned this before, so I think we ought to do it in the depths of the winter here, and we can run it from the fire station in Much Wenlock, and we can link up one Sunday morning across the globe, and we can get everybody who tells stories in different languages just to say how they do it. So I know it's Claire and one or two others I know who are bilingual in the Welsh language. We know Despina, who speaks many languages, and I know another couple of people who tell stories in different languages. And I was just hearing recently about a little Asian lass who told a story in English for the first time, which wasn't her mother tongue. And I think we ought to be able to do that, John, between you and me. So I know I'm putting you on
I'm not sure. I think you've got the date wrong. It's not the 20th. What's the date today? It's the 3rd, isn't it? So it'll be something like the 22nd, 23rd.
Oh, sorry, hang on a minute. Sorry, I got the wrong one.
24th, I think.
It's the 16th.
24th.
So it's not next Sunday, which is the 10th.
So the next week, it's the 3rd today, so the next week will be the 10th.
And the one after that will be the 17th.
It's the 17th.
17th. And I'm not sure where I'll be. Well, I know where I'll be. I'll be in Ireland. But I'm not sure where I'll be at 6 o'clock in the evening.
So the one after that will be the 30th, and you'll be into Father Christmas in by then, won't you?
Yeah, but I can finish. I finish at 5, I think, so I'm clear by 6. I'm in the Forest of Dean on a train.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I'm playing Christmas on a train. Yeah.
Well, you're not going to be back if you're in the Dean finishing at 5. You're not going to get back to Gloucester by 6 to do that.
Oh,
So,
well.
so let's do it on the 17th.
Program.
But let's do it on the 7th. The Christmas stories will be on the 17th, and it'll be one where you can come and give Christmas stories away to everybody. And it gives people time to sort of process them and get them up and running for Christmas this year, 2024. Okay, so we'll call it a Christmas story one, that one. Right. So have you got any parish notices, John?
Well, yes. I'll say them now, and then we must let Norman tell the story, because he's been very patient.
No, Norman's going to tell us a story to finish. So let's get the parish notices.
So, this Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we've got Justin Demere's Tales and Tunes, which anyone is welcome to come and tell a story on, or a poem, or sing a song, and then this Friday coming, we've got David Thompson, who by this time will have finished his electoral duties in Texas, and we'll either celebrate with him or give him our condolences.
Which party is he working for?
Well, I don't know. Put it this way, without being biased, I don't know a lot of storytellers on this site that the Trumpists. So he's trumpeting for Kamala, but he's also does all the counting. He works on the count and so forth, or getting people in.
Right.
He works on the polling stations. So
Right, okay.
but
So he takes all the Trump ones and throws them in the bin, and he puts all the Harris ones and he puts them, because that's what they're saying, isn't it?
well, yeah, they, as a secret ballot, you know, I mean, that's like, isn't it?
In Texas,
Yeah, I think, you know,
yeah.
it's the other lot that sit around outside with their baseball bats and break the legs of the people coming in. But I'm not suggesting that they would do anything like that. But I did
Absolutely.
have a talk. I did have a talk to Trudy Terry's daughter, who's very high up in the Democrat Party in Texas. She's only a little person, a few feet tall, and she's now changed her Facebook picture to a Facebook of her and Kamala together. And she's optimistic, so that makes me feel good. So that's the parish notices.
Right, okay.
So I'm going to hand back to you, Mike.
That's great, thank you very much. So we're going to ask Norman to finish, and I want to work out with Keith from Wolverhampton just before we get to the end, if you can hang on for 2 minutes, because there's something I want to ask you. So Norman, all the way from Toronto, which is in Canada, which comes under the part of the planet that we in Britain always say the world is split into three. It's what was ours, what should have been ours, and what is ours. So I think you're part of what was ours, I think, aren't you? But you still got a king.
Yes, but there's a little bit of French and indigenous in the stew pot as well. So and it's funny, that was the nicest little interchange of political I've heard in a while. But to give the idea of what one side is doing, in the very last kind of on TV talks, the fellow was Trump was talking about having guns, 9 guns pointed towards Liz Cheney, who is herself a Republican, but the implication was that when they win, there would be 9 guns trained on her. And you can draw all you want from that. This is a story I want, and especially after what John, that poem, I would love to get a copy of it. And I chose this story beforehand, but I think it's very apropos. It's a story from a book called When the Chenoo Howls, because the Chenoo is a cannibalistic spirit in the Passamaquoddy mythos. And a Chenoo is a terrible creature because nothing can withstand it. It'll eat and devour anything. And it will, the more that it eats, the hungrier it becomes, so that wants to eat even more. And so when you meet a Chenoo, you say your prayers. Well, it's as this time of the year, people were out in the forest gathering fodder for the long winter up ahead. The young men were hunting deer and other animals. The women would dress the meat and lay it on racks for it to dry. They'd be digging roots that had been growing fat throughout the summer and putting them into bags to be eaten throughout the winter. And so a sister and her 2 brothers were in the forest doing what everyone else had done. Now, there was an area that they knew there was lots of game, but the people had stayed away from that area because that was reputed to be the home of the great Chenoo, the horrible creature, and nobody had ever survived an encounter with the Shinu, except those who could see it from the distance and carry the stories off to be told around the campfires. So one day, the one was dressing the meat of a deer, cutting it up and laying the strips on the over a fire to be smoked, dried and smoked, when suddenly she saw in the distance the Shinu. It was a horrible creature, long hair, crusted with the saliva and snot of its nose and mouth, and with wild burning eyes and long teeth that would devour anything. And so it came howling at her. She knew that she could not run. So she just sat there and waited until the Shinu came up to her, screaming and howling. And then it stopped. It was puzzled. It had never met anyone who had done and behaved like this. Just sitting there, quiet, with a calm look on her face, if not a smile. And when the Shinu had stopped howling, she spoke. She said, "Grandfather," a term of respect for any older person or creature. "Grandfather, we have not seen you in a while. Come, sit down and eat. You must be hungry." And the surprised Shinu sat down and ate. "I am hungry, feed me," he growled from a voice long unused to speaking. And so she said, "There's this dried deer meat here. Help yourself, grandfather." And the Shinu ate all of the dried meat. It ate the hide. It ate everything. And then she brought out baskets of dried berries and laid them in front. And she said, "Grandfather, eat." And the Shinu devoured it. And then she brought in more of the roots that she had painfully gathered in large baskets and put in front of the Shinu. Said, "Grandfather, eat, you must be hungry." And the Shinu devoured everything until everything that the young woman could offer had been given to the Shinu, and everything had been eaten. And it was at this moment that her brothers came out of the forest carrying a deer between them. And she called out to her brothers, "Brothers, come, bring some food for our grandfather, who is very hungry. Come and greet your grandfather." And so the brothers carried the deer and laid it in front of the Shinu, who picked it up and ripped it apart and devoured it until his fur was now slathered with the blood of the deer. And then, when it was finished, there was nothing left to offer the Shinu. And the brothers sat, young woman sat calmly, and the Shinu looked around for the first time, as if seeing the world for the first time in a long, long, long while. And then he said in a hoarse voice, "Make me a sweat lodge. Make me a sweat lodge. Make me a sweat lodge, or I will devour you." And so, from saplings, they built a dome. They took bark, they covered the dome, and they built a fire, and they heated stones, and the stones grew red hot. And the Shinu went inside and said, "Bring water." And they brought vessels of water. And they said, "Bring me the stones." And they threw the stone, handed the stones to the Shinu inside, and the stones red hot, the water exploded in steam, and steam came out of every opening in the sweat lodge. And the Shinu kept on crying out, "More stones, more water." And so they kept on putting the red hot stones one after the other until at last there was silence when they'd handed in the last stone that they had. And for a long time, there was just the steam blowing away in the cool autumn wind. And then out of the lodge there emerged a creature that they could see blinking in the sunlight, that they could see was once a human being who had gone into the forest for whatever reason and been turned into a Shanu. But now that they could see the humanity of the creature. And he said, "Welcome, grandfather," said his daughter. "Welcome back." And the Shanu looked at him, but now a human, said, "It is not finished. It is not finished. I will cough, and I will cough, and I will cough up a sliver of ice. And you must take that ice and throw it into the fire right away, because if you do not, all will be lost, and I will devour you." And then he began to cough and cough. It seemed as if the coughs would rip his thin frame apart. But last, out of his mouth came a shard of glittering ice. And they took the ice and threw it into the fire, and with a hissing sound like the sound of a snake, the shard of ice, the heart of the Shanu, was turned to steam and to mist, and the wind blew it away. And now he was fully human. The young woman took their grandfather, and being carried by the young man, they went back through the forest, back to their village, back home at long last. And that is the story of the Shanu, as I heard from Bruchak.
Oh, thank you very much, Norman. That's lovely. Absolutely lovely. Thank you very much. That's great. Right, so we've all told a story each, and it was lovely to hear Omar, and I hope if he's there, thank you very much, and please come again in 2 weeks' time. We're going to, I would like you all to bring a Christmas story next time, and so we can tell us Christmas stories, and we can get some of these stories told a bit more and everything else. And old Papa Noel there was sometimes, Papa Noel, sometimes he's got another name, it's called John Rowe. And he just, in the summer times, he does other things. And I'm sure he's got lots of poems or stories about that. Despina, I have no idea what they call Father Christmas in Greek. If you're still there, but if you haven't, here she comes.
Yes, you do, Mike. We've discussed it, but it was last year, so it's been a year. It's Agios Vasilis, which means Saint Bill, Saint William.
Right, so
Agios Vasilis.
right. So when you come along, will you please tell a story about him? I have trouble pronouncing your name, Despina.
Imagine you saying Agios Vasilis.
Yeah. Right, it's been lovely to see you all again, and I've had a thoroughly good hour or so. John and I, Malcolm, who works with us at Gary, he's got some ideas about how we get a few more people in. And so we've got a few contacts, and we're going to try we're going to try our best to get a few more people to come and make this last a couple of hours or so every Saturday. It's gone a bit quiet, and I don't like it. Keith, we're not tomorrow. We're a week on. It's a week tomorrow. It's the second Monday again this month. But if you can hang around for 2 seconds, I'd just like to ask you a question. Thank you very much for all being here. And
thank you, Mike, for hosting. And speak nicely to your computer, because AI doesn't like to be ignored.
These upgrades, they came just at the most inconvenient times. I had a Zoom meeting on Friday, but I've been trying to not do storytelling stuff for this. Lynn's back out of hospital, so we've been together this weekend. So
well, I'm glad about that. And thank you, Waleed, for flying the magic carpet as well.
Absolutely. Okay.
Goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Right. Right. I think this is still being transcribed. So there's just a couple of things, Keith. I'm not really having a review meeting at Gary this year. I'm just meeting everybody one-on-one. I met everybody else, and I wondered if you fancied having a beer sometime. I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, we'll meet up.
It's only John Day's gone off to